Hi. You know, we have lived through some very strange months in this first part of 2020, and nothing has been more bizarre in these strange months than the hoarding of toilet paper. Who could have ever figured? But this is what happens as a natural consequence of fear. Fear makes people do, well, the craziest kind of things in so many ways, especially when it comes to the necessities of life. So today, as we come to the Hillside Homily, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going to talk to us about what the inevitable consequences are when we don't pray as in the Lord's Prayer to give us this day our daily bread. If we don't turn to Him, the fountain of living waters, for our daily need, we kind of go crazy. So stay tuned for today in the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay, got to get a little ridiculous. That, by the way, is our entire treasure of toilet paper at the Catholic household. So, just saying. Yeah, wow, we're rich. Okay, so we're back to Sermon on the Mount, Hillside Homily. And Jesus has been extraordinarily practical as he's come into the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, he starts into it saying you need to be salt, you need to be light. Remember that? But he says right off the bat when he says that, but what's the problem when salt isn't salt anymore? What's the usefulness of it? And when light's not light anymore? What's the point of that? So even at the very beginning of the thing, he points out the fact that there's something seriously wrong with us. And so a lot of the Sermon on the Mount is illustrating that. And for instance, he jumps right into problems with our performance. And our performance problems aren't that we aren't doing the right things, but our heart's in the wrong place. Remember that? Our heart's not in it. We're phonies in that particular sense. And then he jumps into problems in our piety. I mean, how we live our religious life on the outside, how we tend to move toward religious theater to showcase how righteous we are. Well, that's a wrecked heart as well. So, and then now in this section, he's going to talk about further problems in our provision, problems when we have needs, how we get messed up in terms of how we satisfy those needs, and how it just is not really salty and lighty when you respond to those needs the wrong way. So that's what he's going to get at. Very, very practical. So I mentioned in that little toilet paper video, Jesus told us last week, he said, you need to pray this, give us this day our daily bread. It's really an affirmation of our daily dependence on what comes from God. Because remember, you're not self-sufficient or self-generating. You are always in need of something outside of yourself. Where do you look? Jesus says, look to God. Give us this day our daily bread for your daily needs. But the problem is when we don't do that, we start creating what I call these problems with provision. And he'll highlight issues like hoarding and even worshiping other gods. I mean, this is a big deal. And this particular topic will occupy the rest of this chapter. It is such a big deal. And I'll just emphasize the fact that not only is it a big deal in the first century, it's a bigger deal to us because we suffer from the opposite problem of not having enough. We have too much. And the writer of Proverbs actually prays to God. I'll show you this verse. He prays to God and says, God, I ask that you don't give me too little or too much. Don't give me too little that I end up cursing you. Don't give me too much that I forget that you exist. So that's the end of the spectrum we're on. So this is really applicable to us. So let's dive in. Here we go. Verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Well, okay, that makes sense. In fact, this word rust, interestingly enough, doesn't really mean rust. It means eating. So every time in the New Testament you see the word eating, you see this word brosis. So why did they translate it rust? Especially since in the first century households, there was almost no iron and steel in the household. So why rust? Well, this is an accommodation to us in modern times. You accumulate stuff but if you leave it all by itself, it just goes away. And iron stuff does that. Right now that it's raining outside, all the shovels and implements we left out in the backyard are starting in their cycle of rust. So what he's getting at is things just go away. So in their particular time, treasures weren't really in the iron that you owned, but it was in the grain that you stored up. Well, in fact, it makes more sense that this word should be eating, because you think about the fact that if you store up all the grain, all these harvests you do, and you're secure when you store up the harvest, still that grain can go away because of mice, rats, whatever, a mold. I mean, so Jesus is saying you can store this stuff up, but by its own nature, it will go away. That's what he's getting at right here. It'll get eaten up. So your possessions inevitably will leave you, is all he's saying. And this is true for nearly everything that is a possession. In fact, we touch on this passage in Luke 12, where he tells him a parable. A guy comes to him, actually, the real context, a guy comes to him and says, Jesus, you need to fix this argument I'm having with my brother. We have this inheritance coming from our parents, and he's not splitting the inheritance fairly. That's not fair. And Jesus says, I'm not supposed to fix this stuff with you guys. But that also brings up an interesting idea, and he tells him a parable. So here's the parable, Luke 12. Jesus told him a parable saying, okay, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, well, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns, I'll build larger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, I'll say, you have ample goods laid up for many years. So relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. And so with this idea in the back of our minds, not only does Jesus tell us that our possessions themselves will leave us, but we will leave our possessions. So that's the point. So possessions are not a permanent thing in any aspect because, one, they're self-destructing. Two, you're self-destructing. It becomes very pertinent to the question that was asked because this guy's saying, my brother's not splitting the inheritance. Well, everyone's going to die. You're going to die too. So the inheritance is really not that big an issue. What the big issue you need to be thinking about, he says, is being rich toward God, getting away from these possessions. So that's what Jesus is steering us to right here as we talk about the problem of our provisions. And then he says, well, let me do this. So what's our solution? What's our solution in the 21st century when things self-destruct? Well, you get mothballs or airtight storage containers. Right? We have the technology. So Jesus says this stuff is going to self-destruct. We can fight that self-destruction. We can make sure that never happens. No, it still goes away. It still does. Even if you buy that 25 years shelf life food you put on your shelves, you're going to eat after the apocalypse happens and the zombies are walking all over the land, stuff like that. Yeah, it's still going to go away. But go away not in 25 years perhaps, but when we talk about time scales much larger than 25 years like eternity, it's going away. So it's the temporal nature of it. So no, we don't do this, although this is our temptation, because in the 21st century we fix those things because we think we know enough about them to do something about it. No. By the way, just a little thing. Moths eating your clothes was a big deal back then because one of the best possessions you had was your clothing. Because you remember, the fabric was hand woven. So what you wore was meticulously hand woven by someone. So clothing was extraordinarily expensive, especially heavy clothing that kept you warm in the wintertime because that was your only source of being comfortable when it's cold outside. So clothing was an extraordinarily practical and valuable thing. And the warmest clothing came from the sheep, which were raised in Israel, and sheep produce wool. You're with me, okay. I can't tell if you're dozing because I can't see if your mouth's hanging open. Okay. Sheep, and so sheep make wool, and you weave stuff into wool, and there are certain kind of moths that love wool, and so this wonderful garment that's airtight and complete, and you can keep warm in, suddenly the moths are eating holes in it. It's self-destructive. I mean, that's just really bad. By the way, I have a suit at home that's got a lot of moth holes in it. So next time you see me wearing my black suit, see if you can spot them. So this is real. These things still exist. I mean, many of us think, nothing eats rayon, but stuff still eats wool. So just saying. Okay. So he goes on and he says, after this, the issue is not so much the nature of the things. The issue is where you store the things on earth. So the solution isn't to buy mothballs. The solution, the problem is that the earth is the wrong place to store anything. That's what he's getting at. It's the wrong place to store anything. So lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, the other place, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. So if you really want to solve this problem, Jesus says, this particular problem with provision, don't go trying to store stuff here and thinking it'll always be there because it self-destructs and you self-destruct and it's just not going to happen. You need to realize that this place is cursed. or the earth is cursed. It self-destroys itself because of the fallenness of sin. It's a bad place. You need to store your treasures someplace else because there are no moths and there is no rust in heaven. Woohoo! Of course, since there's so much gold in heaven, that doesn't rust, so we don't care about that. But I mean, it's a different kind of thing. So he has this issue and brings up the point that the here place that we live in, earth, it's temporary and it's decaying. And we know this, but we still try and store up provisions. It's temporary and decaying, as opposed to heaven, which is permanent and lasting. So Jesus, the one who came out of heaven down to earth, is giving us a heaven and earth perspective. And he's saying, if you're caught in this whole idea of storing up stuff here, you're going to be very disappointed because stuff here decays and it's going away. You need to take a larger viewpoint for heaven as well. Okay, so you need to put your treasures there instead and quit being consumed with treasures here. Hebrews 13:14 says this so well. It's in the end of Hebrews. For here, earth, for here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. Great verse. So his mindset in Hebrews 13 is, here is an okay place, and we like earth. We like what goes on here. It's a fallen place, but here nothing is lasting. So we look and set our hopes on the place that is lasting, the city which is to come. So that's a mindset we should have. And when you're consumed with how to deal with your day-to-day needs and don't go to God for those things, your focus is not on the horizon of the eternal. Your focus is on tomorrow. So that's what he's saying. You got to get away from that focus. Okay, another point to really strengthen this is the sense of loss. So you see the loss there with things, my treasured suit, which is being eaten up by moths. I hate that. And the food that goes away that you store. Don't you hate throwing stuff out from the fridge? Especially if it's something you save because it's really tasty. And you say, one of these days I'm going to sit down and just go back to that and really enjoy that. And then when you get that moment, you get that special moment to eat that special thing that you've been storing up in the fridge, and you go in there and you open the Tupperware, and it's green and fuzzy. And for just a split second, you think, I could probably scrape that off. And you say, no, I'm not going to do that. There is tremendous heartbreak. So he gives us a phrase to let us know there's great heartbreak. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So in the loss on the left side of that screen, in this here place that's self-decaying, since your heart is invested in that thing that's there, get ready for the fact that your heart is going to be broken because you lose things here. If you put your trust in things here, you will be heartbroken all the time. All the time. If indeed you move your perspective to the eternal, instead that something that can't be lost, then you won't be heartbroken in that particular sense. But look, where your treasure is, there is where your heart is. And if you remember, the heart is a place of things like joys and hopes and delights, and on the opposite side of that, disappointments. So your heart is gonna go with that decay, and it's not going to suffer that well because you put your hope in the wrong place. That's all he's saying. Now look, I want to be really clear about this. There's nothing wrong with food. There's nothing wrong with having plenty of food. I mean, really, there's not. And that the issue of the plentifulness of food is really not the issue whether food is good or bad for you, or particular kinds of food are good or bad for you. Because in Mark, Jesus comments for us and says, so Jesus says basically all food is good. So come on, that's not the issue. The issue is where your heart goes when you try and store that stuff, whether it's food or provision long term. Where's your heart in all this? This is simpatico with everything he's talked to coming up to this point, because remember, problems in performance were problems with your heart. It's not problems in what you do. And the problems in piety, problems with your heart, not what you do. And here when we talk about provision and trying to store stuff, it's not the provision itself that's the problem. It's the problem with your heart investing in it as a wealth. It's what your heart goes to. So wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart is. And this is a wonderfully deductive verse as well, this one he just said. Because if you ask yourself, well, where is my heart? Well, ask yourself where your treasure is. What is it that was it that key lime pie that's in our fridge right now? Part of my birthday celebration. And part of me is thinking, yeah, man, I'm going to sit down and Okay, so where's your heart? That's the whole point. That's the point Jesus is trying to make. If your heart is invested in the temporary and decaying, you are going to be very disappointed. Like that guy who had this bountiful year, and he actually had two options to do with the bountifulness of his crops. He could store it, but he realized his barns were too small, so he actually tore them down and built bigger barns. Or option number 2 is what? Give some away. Come on, buddy. Give some away. And actually, that mindset Jesus is going to go to in a second here. He's going to go to in a second. Well, not only is there loss on that side, but there's great gain on this side. Because when you get there on the right, your heart, which has invested its hopes and dreams in the stuff on the right, will suddenly be completed in the in the gaining of that, and you won't be disappointed. You'll exult in joy. So there really is two different attitudes of your heart. If it's invested in the wrong place, either on the left, you will eventually and inevitably be disappointed. On the right, you will eventually and inevitably rejoice. How about that? Well, this was captured in a great quote. A fellow that I met one time, Randy Alcorn, he's an author now, a Christian author. He who lays up treasures on earth spends his life backing away from his treasures. To him, death is loss. But he who lays up his treasures in heaven looks forward to eternity. He's moving daily toward his treasures. To him, death is gain. Isn't that a great quote? That's exactly what Jesus is talking about. So beware of where you invest your hopes and dreams. If it's in the temporary decaying, you will be disappointed. If it's in the eternal, you'll rejoice. Because the eternal is not eaten by moths and rust. It's there forever. That, by the way, that's part of what when Paul writes and says, I know whom I believed, and he's able to keep what I've entrusted to him. That's what we're talking about right there. Until that day, the day when that's completed. Okay. There's 3 things he's going to point out in this passage in terms of problems with provision. And this is the first one. It's sort of a sense of false durability. We think that if we put our treasures here, that it's more durable than it actually is, and it's not. It's not permanent. If you have investments in Wall Street, not only is it not durable, it's volatile. I mean, it goes up and down based on the whims of the attitudes of the hopefulness of our culture. I mean, talk about fleeting. We know that one really, really well. There was always a sense in which you talk about monetary stuff, that gold, yeah, that's good stuff that can weather all those kind of storms. Even gold itself has some problems. But again, what we're talking about here is that there's something of a lie going when we talk about putting our treasures and things here, that it's more durable than it actually is. So anyway, there's 3 falsehoods in this provision stuff he's going to talk about. Let's move to the second one. He goes to what is a really difficult passage for most people. Here we go. The eye of the lamp is the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Got problems with that? Yeah. We should all have problems with that, because there's some deeply embedded Hebrew idioms in this. Then unless you do a little study, this part seems kind of nutty. But Jesus is speaking their language. He's speaking something that they understand fully. And remember, he's also tying back to, remember at the beginning he says, if you're salt, you need to be salty. If you're light, you need to be lighty. So here's the issue. And he's bringing that back here. So what's he talking about? Well, let's get to the idiom, and it'll help you really fast. Right there, that word, if your eye is healthy, that word healthy actually means generous. It's probably a much better translation, is generous. And how do we know that? Because if you take that Greek word and you look up its variations in other parts of the New Testament, James 1:5, Romans 12:8, 2 Corinthians 9:11, in their adverb forms or the adjective forms, it means generous. He means generous. In the Corinthians ones, he's talking about giving liberally. That's that word. So really it's generous. The Hebrew idiom is that whoever has a good eye has a generous eye. And it comes down to the fact that, when you see someone in need with your eye, what does that evoke in you? Someone who has a good eye is generous. Someone who has a bad eye is not. See, so that's the idea here, is generosity here. And we're talking about provisions and generosity and provisions. So if your eye is bad, basically what he's saying is you're stingy. So these are really the 2 ideas. And this comes back to our fictional farmer who's got too much. He has two choices. He can either be generous or he can be stingy. He decides to be stingy and build a barn and keep it for himself rather than giving. So we really are in a provision discussion right here. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. And if your eye is bad, your body is full of darkness. The light in you is darkness. How great is the darkness? So what he's getting to right here in the idiom is the fact that when you have lots of stuff, does your heart move toward being generous with the lots of stuff, or does your heart move to being stingy and keeping it for yourself and increasing your take in this? That's the whole point, and that becomes a dominant theme in the next problem right here. Because when you talk about provisions, especially now in the 21st century where we have too much, the issue is, what do you do with your too much? Are you building more barns, or are you giving a lot of it away? If you listen to Dave Ramsey, the Christian financial guy on the radio and stuff like that, he'll always say one of the best results of getting free of debt and being financially sound is it allows you to give. It allows you to give. I mean, don't be stupid and don't do dumb stuff that endangers the welfare of your family that you're taking care of with that income. But when you get to a point that you're not paying your debtors and now you have more money coming in, what an opportunity you have to give. That's the great opportunity with wealth. So that's what Jesus is hinting at right here. Are you a generous or are you a stingy kind of guy? Because that will actually enter into your soul. That's the inside of you, and you become to the core stingy or to the core generous. That's what he's saying. This is what provisions will do to you in excess provisions. We do this on the right over there. We say someone turns a blind eye toward need. So that's what we're talking about. I won't get into that. But anyway, turning a blind eye is all about seeing a need and going, not seeing that, not seeing that, not seeing that. It's exactly this idea right here about the good and bad eye. Are you generous or are you stingy when you have too much? That's what Jesus is getting at with the problem of provisions here. Now, what it really is talking about is that on the left, you have an outflow in your life, and on the right, you're constantly looking at inflow. This is really particularly important because what Jesus is saying is that when you have excess, is your heart set on outflowing the excess, or is your heart set on just making it inflow to you and you puddle up in you? Are you an outflow-oriented person or are you an inflow-oriented person? So when it comes to provision, many people who don't look to God are inflow-oriented. They instead basically say, I need my necessaries because I need to stay alive. I'll do anything possible to inflow it into my life. Anything, because it's necessary. And outflow to give to someone else? I don't think so. There's not enough to go around as it starts. And this brings us back to the idea of the toilet paper. Because people who are inflow-oriented look at the pending crisis and say, I better look out for myself first, and I better hoard for me because no one else will look out for me. What if it all goes away and there's not enough to go around? The smart ones, like me, will get out there as fast as possible and fill up 4 or 5 pallets at Costco with as many rolls of toilet paper as possible, and I'll be the winner because I've got the toilet paper and you don't. That's very inflow-oriented. The opposite of that is in the toilet paper shortage, which that caused, which there wasn't one before. The toilet paper shortage, someone who's outflow-oriented looks around and says, hey, have you got enough toilet paper? I've got plenty at home. Can I give you mine? That's outflow-oriented. And not worrying about the inflow side. Why? Because the inflow ultimately comes from God. So if you have a hidden source, that's your connection with God, it frees your heart not to be inflow-oriented and to be outflow-oriented. And we use this metaphor all the time between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. If you visit Israel, you'll realize the Dead Sea is dead. And it's dead because water goes into it, but it only evaporates to leave it. And so it leaves behind all the minerals and salts. It's really pretty bad. But Galilee is very healthy. Why? Well, because it has an inflow from the north, from Mount Hermon. It has an outflow to the south, down to the Dead Sea. It's constantly flowing through. And in Old Testament imagery, the whole idea of the word living water means moving water. So moving water is healthy. Non-moving water is stagnant and dies. Provision in your life is healthy as long as it comes in and goes out. You'll be a Sea of Galilee. But if it just goes in and puddles up, you'll turn into a Dead Sea. In Utah, we have the same analog. You've got Utah Lake, which has inflows and outflows. It's relatively healthy. And then you've got the Great Salt Lake that has inflows and no outflows. Dead. If you want to be dead, be an inflow person and never worry about outflow. Christians in a difficult economic situation in their culture where things are short of supply, Christians always move toward, I've got some, let me share mine with you. You see this also when you read difficult situations, like when you read Corrie ten Boom, when she talks about the hiding place, and she's in the concentration camps that she's in. It's very clear that in the midst of not having enough, she and her sister Betsy, especially when people are in need, say, I've got some, let me share it with you, instead of saying, I've got mine, too bad for you. Christians are always outflow oriented. That's what he's getting at. Okay. So the second thing, the first one's false durability, it doesn't last. The second one is kind of false privilege. And I put it that way because when you're totally inflow oriented, you think you deserve the things more than other people, and that's why you can hold on to them and not outflow. It's really a false sense of privilege. I'm me, I've got my stuff, I'll be only concerned about myself. Too bad for you, false privilege. Okay, then he moves on to this last third section about the problems with our provisions. He says, no one can serve two masters. Basically, a slave can't have two owners, right? Because the words he used are pure slave words, not just employees, pure slave words. A slave can't have two owners, right? Right. That doesn't work. What would it look like if you were a slave and you had two owners? Like if you were a slave and you're sold by your previous owner and you go to the new owner and both owners are giving you demands every day of things to do. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can really only serve one. So a slave can only have one owner. For either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. And we know this. It just makes tons of sense. That's just the way it works. So Jesus, what does this have to do with our problems with provision? Well, because you can't serve God and mammon. Well, I don't think I'm serving mammon. By the way, I put mammon in there instead of wealth because the Greek word is mammon. I mean, it's this word over here, mammonas. And mammonas means more than just money. In fact, I think its best translation in the 21st century is stuff. It's anything that you accumulate that brings you joy and happiness and the wealth that you look to. It can be financial investments. It can be your four-wheeler in the backyard. It can be your Netflix subscription. I mean, it can be anything. It's the stuff that you gather around yourself, like gathering into your barn, that makes you happy and provides sustenance in life for you. So mammon is all of that stuff. And ironically, the word came to be used in classic Greek, like we're talking Aristotle and stuff like that. Yeah, even though it still means stuff is wealthy stuff, it came to mean a synonym for confidence. What is your confidence in? What is your stuff that gives you confidence? And so in that sense, you come back to gold where someone says, you need to get out of the stock market. Boy, it's flighty. You know where I have my confidence? I have my confidence in gold. See, so the stuff ends up being the confidence. So mammon at the time, which is actually a Hebrew word, it's not a Greek word. Mammon is a Greek-ized, transliterated Hebrew word, and it means the stuff that you look to provide for your future and that gives you life. So at this point, you have to stop and do just a little bit of self-inspection, and you got to ask yourself, what are those things that you put around you, your stuff, that you look to provide security and a future, especially a future. And you can figure out whether or not that stuff is mammon by playing the thought experiment. What would happen if I lost it? Does my heart grieve as a part of that? Or do you say, well, God provided once, he can provide again. He'll see to my needs. Or do you grieve over the thing that you put your heart's investment into? If it is that, that's mammon. That's mammon. So Jesus right here says, look, the issue isn't just how to provide for your needs. The issue is the ultimate falsehood in this stuff is it pushes you into idolatry. It pushes you into idolatry because you cannot serve God and mammon. As though God and mammon are both gods. Mammon's a god, yes, because of what your heart does with it. Not because it's a real God. but because you have invested your hope and your dreams and everything in that. And so you serve that. You put all your hopes and dreams and excess cash into your stock market account, and then 2008 comes along and you lose half of it. Oh, ouch, that really hurts. Where do you put your trust? What do you look towards? Then do you go back to your computer and rearrange your investments and agonize about how you're going to do this? In a sense, sort of worshiping your God that's going to provide for your future. Now look, I'm not saying that retirement accounts are bad. I'm not saying that money is bad. It's not the outside stuff. It's your heart's investment in the thing that's the problem. That Jesus comes back to that that's the problem with performance, that's the problem with piety, it's the problem with provisions, is your heart starts to twist and starts to worship. It starts to worship your provisions. It does. So Jesus says you can't serve both of them. Just like a slave cannot serve two masters, you can't serve God and mammon, the collection of stuff that you think is going to give you a future. You can't. It's either or. Now, is it possible for a Christian to own stuff and not have your stuff own you? Yes, it is possible. But beware of your heart, because the degree to which your heart starts to invest in your future security based on that thing, it becomes mammon, and you've moved God out of the place that he's supposed to be, as you're supposed to look to him to provide for you. And you turn that thing into your God. It's idolatry. This is a supreme danger, which is why Jesus will spend the rest of this chapter talking about this very thing, and even then some. So you've got false durability, stuff goes away, false privilege, cause me, it's all about me and filling up my barns. And then you come down to this thing, it's really a false God. Provisions that you have can become a false God. It can become a false, even to this sublimely ridiculous thing when this virus thing hit and you saw people on TV carting away toilet paper by the truckload into their houses. You probably went to your stash of toilet paper at your house and you counted them. I'm good. You just did a mammon thing because you put your trust in your stockpile. God tells the rulers of Israel, don't count your troops. Why? Because you'll begin to think that the number of your troops has something to do with your security, and it doesn't. Your security comes from God, not come from numbering. So don't number your troops. Stop it. Don't number your troops, because that has nothing to do with anything. But wait a second, God. In standard field warfare, the guys with the most troops and the most chariots win. Why shouldn't I count that? I mean, I don't want to go out in a field of battle and have half the guys and half the horses of my other guys, because they'll just whip me. And God says, really? Whose battle is this? Is this your battle or my battle? Oh, yeah, that's right. So why are you counting your troops if it's my battle? Oh, yeah. So why are you counting your toilet paper if I'm providing for you? Oh, right. So it's very easy to slip into mammon thinking with something even as innocuous as the toilet paper you got on the shelf in the closet. You just don't put your trust, it's a heart thing. Your heart will go there. Your heart will go there. Instead, you look at the toilet paper and say, God's been good to me. He continues to be good to me. I wonder if my neighbor or friend doesn't have as much toilet paper. I'm going to gather some of this up and walk down the street and see if they need some. You're only free to do that to the degree that you know God will provide for you. See? So it's a radically different idea. False durability, false privilege, false God. Provisions are prone to idolatry even. So we'll wrap up with this idea. It's not my favorite sheep picture, but it's pretty good. Now, let me ask you in this picture, how many of these sheep do you see running around worried about what they're going to eat? Well, none, because the shepherd already brought them to where they can find food. He was very good to them. In fact, when you typically think of sheep, you don't think of sheep as being aggressively looking for their next meal. I mean, they get hungry like the rest of us. But they're not like wolves in that sense. Wolves get hungry and they start getting into packs and they start hunting things down. You know, you don't see sheep going into packs and hunting down food. Why? Well, because they have an established relationship with their shepherd. So when you look in that context, the whole idea of what we just looked about in terms of provision seems just absolutely stupid. I mean, it looks so stupid unless you forget you have a shepherd. Because look at the beginning of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Right? You know this verse? Why is it that you shall not want?
Because he leads you in green pastures.
We have a shepherd. We have a source to fill our needs. In fact, that word want, it's not a really great translation. I want lots of stuff. You know, I want a bigger motorcycle. But this is not want. This is really when you go wanting. So it's really I shall not want. It's I shall not lack. So the Lord is my shepherd. Hey, so I'll never lack. That's the first line of Psalm 23, and we just totally forget it when we're running out of toilet paper. I mean, really, when provisions don't seem to match our needs and we start to go into desperation mode about how we're going to make those match, we don't automatically go to, it's okay, I got a shepherd. He sees my need. Jesus told us last week, when you pray, don't do this endless repetition stuff because, hey, when you start to pray, he already knows what you need. Ah! So when the provisions don't seem to meet the need, our knee-jerk reaction shouldn't be, I'll band together like a pack of wolves and I'll go take it from somewhere. Invest my worship in that. What I'll say is, I have a shepherd. He's fulfilled my needs. He continues to see my needs. I have a shepherd, so I will never lack. And then he goes on and talks in the rest of Psalm 23 about exactly how that works. You know, leads me in green pastures. Ding! Still waters. Ding! Right? And at the end of Psalm 23, you remember Psalm 23?
And I shall live dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Okay, dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What's just before that? Do you remember what's just before that? Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Not goodness and mercy I shall pursue in a pack with my friends the rest of my life. Do you see that? I mean, it's passive. Why? Because I have a shepherd, so I won't lack. Sure enough, in the conclusion, so goodness and mercy, they'll follow me all my life. Why? Because I have a shepherd. I mean, we just gloss over it. So look, I want to suggest the fact that when you start moving into mammon thinking about your stuff, it's because you've forgotten you have a shepherd who provide for you. It's really evidence of your relationship with God being wrecked. And no one is immune from this. When your provisions don't match your needs, you go into panic mode because God's given us enough of a brain to realize that there's a mismatch. Something's going to come up short. And that's okay. That's exactly what God wants you to understand is when I look at what I have, what I can control, it doesn't match what I need. I was thinking about this week in the 1973 gas crisis, which a lot of us have seemed to have forgotten because we're just not old enough to have lived in 1973. But in 1973, all the oil producers around the world decided to put together a cartel and to limit the amount of oil in the market and cause a shortage of gasoline. And if you lived during that time, if you wanted gasoline, you got up early, you put your car in a line at the gas station, and the cars would line up behind you and in front of you, and you'd be there for hours, hoping that by the time you got up to the pump, they didn't close the tanks. It happened to me once. Sat there for 2 hours. And it was just a big line in front of me, and that line inches up. You know, how long does it take a car to fill up? Maybe like 2 or 3 minutes. Every 2 or 3 minutes, your car moves one car length forward. And then you get up to the pump, and just as I'm next, you know, and you see that car up there, I'm next. And then the attendant comes out with this little sign that says, closed. Ah! Right? That was 1973. So we're not stupid. We understand when the provisions don't meet our needs. But do you go all mammon? Or do you say, I have a shepherd. I won't lack. And you pray and say, God, you see my need. Can you fix this? And he does. God wants us to groom a growing dependence on him. He made us biologically and psychologically needy for something outside of ourselves. You don't solve the psychological need by finding yourself, because that's the problem. You just have you. You don't solve the problem with physical needs by eating your own flesh. That doesn't work. You can try it, but it just doesn't get anywhere. No, God made us needy for something outside of ourselves. That's deliberate on his part. That's deliberate. And it's a gigantic biological, psychological hint that he's made us intimately, soulishly needy for something outside of us, and that's him. So when we talk about provision problems, Jesus is trying to tell us that what you need to do is turn to the fact that you have a shepherd. You're going to say, Steve?
I was going to add to the mammon social status.
Social status.
He wanted you to be in relationship with other people, him recognizing us or God.
Boy, isn't that really true? And and social status is what he says is another form of mammon, and it's something you actually hunger for, and you put investments into, and hope that it brings life back to you. And that's how you can tell when you're actually mammonizing and idolizing things. Is do you invest in it, hoping it'll return to you? When in fact it's usually a lie; it doesn't return to you. And in fact, when you invest in it, hoping it'll return life to you, many times it just self-decays. So, when it comes to social status, someone can say something nasty behind your back, and you're done. All that effort you did being friendly with all those people you hate, it's gone. There you go. So it's all quite fleeting. But there's a song we sung from Wendell Kimbrough. I think we sung it last week. There's no other love you have that'll never fail you. God's the only one. God's the only one. So put your heart and your trust and your intentions there. And then in the immediacy of the now, where the provisions don't meet the need, remind yourself, oh, well, it's a good thing I have a shepherd. I have enough right now. I'll share this with somebody else because I'm a giver because God gives to me. So this whole inflow, outflow, are you dedicated to terminal inflow into your life and pooling it up and never having it go out? Or even in the midst of the mismatch of provision and need, are you still aimed at giving? Because after all, I have a giving pipeline from my shepherd. And even though I can't see it, he'll provide for me. He's done it in the past. So the breakdown in the idolatry that comes from a lack of provision, that idolatry is a natural inflow into your life. The idolatry happens when you forget that you have a God. And that happens all through the Bible. If you forget you have a God, you'll replace that God with something else. And when it comes to provisions, it's the provisions. This happens all the time. This is the way it works. God has created you for a relationship with him. And even in the area of provisions, you are prone to idolatry if you don't keep him your shepherd. Okay, one last example, and this is one of my favorites. I talked about this a couple years ago in one of my cell phone talks. This whole idea of inflow and outflow. Inflow pools up like the Dead Sea, like the Great Salt Lake. Outflow is like the Sea of Galilee and Utah Lake. Inflow and out. So outflow orientation. And so we jump to the prophet Jeremiah. This is for you, Mike. We're in Jeremiah. Watch this. Did you read this? Jeremiah, he says in Jeremiah 2:11, has a nation changed its gods even though they're not gods? Has it done that? He's talking about Israel. He's talking about Israel. Has a nation changed its gods even though they're not gods? Before we go on, Mike and I were talking about this week. Remember that part in Isaiah where he talks about how powerless the false gods are? They are so stinking powerless that if they fall over, they can't get up. We had a good laugh about that this week because that's exactly what Isaiah says. Right in contrast to God saying, I'm the God who got you out of Egypt. I'm the God who's bigger than Pharaoh. I'm the God who's bigger than 400 years of captivity. I got you out of Egypt. Why are you going to their gods when their gods fall over? They can't get up. Well, this is what he's saying right here. Has a nation changed its gods, even though they are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. How? Well, look, be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked. Be utterly desolate, declares the Lord. And here it is. For my people have committed two evils. And what are they? They've forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. This is devastating. You see what he's saying? They once were in vital relationship with me, the fountain of living waters. Living water moves, limitless supply. They once were connected to me, the fountain of living waters. And then somehow they believe this lie that if they dig a big hole in the ground, and when it rains, the water will go into that hole and it'll save it there forever. It's the equivalent of the big barn for the guy that Jesus was talking about. Now we have a big pool. Now it rains, I'll save all this water. I'll never be without water because I have saved it due to my ingenuity. Ha ha! Cisterns, we love them. If you go to Israel, you'll find cisterns put in various places. One of the most prominent places where you'll find cisterns is where Herod built his mesa top dwelling at Masada. And you go up there and there's cisterns built there to hold the water. The problem is, from an engineering perspective, cisterns that are dug into rock should not leak, but they do. They develop cracks. And very well known. Very well known. And so Jeremiah says, here's the heartbreak. We talk about inflow and outflow people. Here's the heartbreak. They have traded me, the source of living water, constant provision of water from me. Give us this day our daily bread. They have traded that God for a self-made God of storing provision, a cistern. And the heartbreak, the self-decay heartbreak of it with the cisterns, is they built for themselves cisterns that can't even hold water. They put their hope and their trust and their joy in that. And then in a day of drought, when they go to that cistern, it's empty. It's empty. It's exactly what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 6. Exactly. If you're an inflow dominant thinker and you want to store the excess of what you have for you and you alone, the problem according to Matthew 6 is it decays. The problem according to Jeremiah 2 is it leaks away. This is the wrong place on earth. It's the wrong place to try and store that kind of stuff. The right approach is to remember, hey, I've got a shepherd. Hey, there's grass. Excuse me. Right? You have a shepherd. So again, the whole idea with the idolatry of provision, you will be susceptible to the idolatry of provision when you forget you have a shepherd. That's just the simple takeaway of the entire thing. So next time all the alarm bells go off in your head because you have a need and a declining provision to meet that need, when those alarm bells go off, and they should go off because we're smart people and we understand when we're coming up short, when those alarm bells go off, even though your heart is tempted to go all mammon and to try and go out there and hunt in a pack and find it and take it home and lock it under lock and key and put it in your cistern so it doesn't go away, although that's your temptation, refute that temptation. Say, well, then it's a good thing I have a shepherd. Because he's the one that allows goodness and mercy to follow me all the days of my life. Wow. So when we get into tough places like we're in right now, I marvel at people who don't know the Lord. Not marvel, but my heart goes out to them. Because there is a panic that ensues. There's a panic and a fear that ensues that, like I talked about when I was nestled with the toilet paper, makes you do crazy things. Makes you do abusively crazy things against other people. But what is the salt and light in low provision times that Jesus wants us to be? He wants us to be people who are outflowers when there's a shortage. He wants us to go to other people and say, well, look, I've got 4 rolls of toilet paper. I'll give you 2 of mine. You sure you want to do that? I mean, that only leaves you 2. Well, I have a shepherd. Have you heard about him? He provides my needs. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. I'm good. And for them, that sounds like crazy talk. It sounds like crazy talk. But in the midst of shortages, that's exactly how God wants to glorify himself. So through you, through your dependence on him, you'll become salty and you'll become lighty. And you can proclaim to the world that I have a God who's not dead and distant on the corner of the universe. I have a God who's near and who sees my needs before I even pray for them. Do you want to know who that God's like? In the middle of a provision shortfall, God's glorified. Let your good works so shine before men that they glorify your Father. And this is just a great example. So be an outflower. Be a giver. Years ago, I was kind of convicted by a friend of mine who left a gift on my front door. And he left this gift. He tried to talk to me, but I wasn't home at the time. So he left the gift, left a note on it. And it was a very strange gift. It was actually kind of a toy. It was odd when I first looked at it. So I played with the toy for a while. And well, it was pretty cool. In fact, it's kind of a, yeah, I won't describe it, but it was actually a really well-suited gift in that particular sense. And what God convicted me of at the time was that, Jim, you're just not much of a giver. But your friend spotted this thing, and he said, you know what? Even though I haven't seen Jim for 2 or 3 years, I think he'd like this. And he went and bought it, and he dropped it at my front door. He's a giver. Ever since that time, I prayed to God and said, God, you need to make me a giver, because I'm not a natural giver. I don't think of other people when I see things and say they would love this. Some of you do this very well, and I take notes when I see you do this, because I still want to be much more of a giver in that sense. But Jesus is saying that for those who follow him, they resist the temptation to take their things and turn them into mammon to worship. And instead, they look to the greatest giver of the universe, the great shepherd himself, who gave himself for us. And that in us starts to build a heart as a giver, even when your provisions are low. And that tastes like salt to the world. So beware of the problems of provision. Now he's going to go on. He's not done with this topic. And I understand why, because in the first century, there was great shortfalls in provisions. We were not in the same place. So he's going to spend the next bunch of breath just talking about exactly what this looks like. You remember the stuff about, hey, if you looked at the birds, they don't seem to put anything in barns and they're alive. How does that happen? Hey, look at those flowers. So you remember that section? That's coming up. He's going to use that to amplify this whole thing. That is God trustable if you make him your shepherd, even when you have the concrete shortfall in provision? Is it foolhardy to say God will provide for me? He'll talk about that a lot. And then just one comment, because this is something we mess up on. Does it mean that when we have need, what we need to do is sit in a chair in a dark room and say to God, God, I need more toilet paper. And then every day, God, I need more toilet paper. When in your closet, you've got 15 rolls. So is it more glorifying to God to just use what he's already given you, or to sit in a pious way and ask him because he's your shepherd? That's why at the beginning of the announcements, I put up a quote that said, if God gives you a watch, a timekeeping watch, does it glorify him more? I'm kind of loosely paraphrasing. Does it glorify him more to keep asking him what time it is? Or to just read the watch he gave you already? So there's a balance in this entire provision thing that you need to look at what God has already given you and glorify God, thank him for it. And then sitting down in the dark and asking him when he's already provided for you actually is something of a blasphemy. You thank him for what he's given you, but when you really do come up to zero, you say, well, God, you're my shepherd, you provide. So there is a part of being diligent about what he's already given you, and there's nothing irreverent about just using that, because he's already given it to you. So thank him for it and use it. But continue to look to him to provide for you in your daily needs. Father, give us this day our daily needs. That's the necessities. Okay? Whew. It's tough stuff. We're in a materialist culture. We are very prone to mammonizing everything. Ooh. Father, we pray that you would protect our hearts. We know you made us to be needy, and we're delighted you make us needy because we find the fulfillment of our need in you and in you alone. But Lord, the constant battle of needs and provisions, especially when we come up short, is such a great temptation, a real temptation to make the focus of our entire life in restoring those provisions. And Lord, I get it. There's nothing wrong with being diligent in doing that, in using the resources you've given us, whether it's in our own talents and ability to do that. There's nothing wrong with it. We get that, Lord. But Lord, I'm praying for our hearts. And speaking personally for myself, I'm praying that you would protect my heart from worshiping those things which will satisfy my needs, whether it be food or whether it be social connections or whether it be anything. God, we need you to protect our hearts from falling for the lie of that and somehow believing that even if we had it, it would be durable in some sense. And even believing the lie that somehow we deserve it and we're privileged in that sense. And even believing the fact that it is so powerful when we have it, it's like our God. Lord, it's embarrassing to admit that we actually go down that path with these things, but we do. So protect our hearts above all else. Lord, you'll take care of the needs. We know you will. Goodness and mercy follow us all the days of our lives because you're our shepherd. But God, keep our hearts from idolizing the provisions that we need and turning our eyes away from you. That's what we ask for. That's what we ask for. And Lord, in an extreme sense, if it means that we go without in a physical provision sense, and yet our hearts remain connected to you as our shepherd, that's the better option in all this, rather than having the provisions and forgetting about you. So Lord, we join our voices with the writer of Proverbs. We join our voice with him and say, God, we ask that you don't give us too little or too much, because we realize the dangers, especially living in a world that has too much, of just forgetting you. We want our relationship with our shepherd, our great shepherd, to be reinforced and deepened as a result of this provision issue and not be taken the place of. So guard our hearts, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.